Hey everyone, welcome back to City Skylines. My name is James, and today I'm introducing a new series to you. So in this series, I want to tell the story of a fictional North American city as it grows organically throughout the 20th century and into the 21st. But there's a twist. We're going to answer what-ifs from the history of American planning. Things like, what if redlining had never happened? What if highways hadn't torn through inner city neighborhoods? What if paradise hadn't been paved with parking lots? So to do that, I've decided to play with regular game rules. We're not using infinite money, we're not unlocking everything at the start, and I'm thinking we'll play through 3 or so thematic phases, and they'll correspond roughly to historical periods in American history. So in phase 1, we'll build up our city to where it would be in the early 20th century, around the 1920s to 1930s time frame. And up to this point, American cities really didn't look all too different from their European counterparts. Although here in the game, we'll make choices to preserve racial equity and avoid the practice of redlining, which began in real life following the end of Reconstruction in the 19th century. And in phase 2, we'll look at how the city changes in the middle of the 20th century, and we'll make purposeful choices to avoid the pitfalls of car dependency and suburban sprawl. And this phase will be thematically centered around 1950 through 1970. And then finally in phase 3, we'll jump to a contemporary point of view in the 21st century, and we'll deal with problems that our cities face right now, things like gentrification and climate change. So I've decided to call the city Douglas, and it's set somewhere in the American Mid-Atlantic region. Think Virginia or Maryland. And what you're seeing in the background right now is the starter town that I've built up off camera so that we have something to work from. And as you might have guessed, the principal inspiration for Douglas is the city of Washington, D.C. But I'm also pulling from Philadelphia, Baltimore, Toronto, Montreal, and New York City. The name Douglas in the lore of this city is in honor of the 19th century writer and abolitionist Frederick Douglass. The name also connects to its real-life inspiration. If Washington, D.C. gained statehood, Douglas Commonwealth is one proposed name. Okay, so that about wraps up my explanation of the theming of this city. Now let's talk briefly about some logistical things you may want to know for this series. This is a modded playthrough. I've made a Steam Workshop collection of all the mods that I'm using, and if you're familiar with the modding scene of this game, you'll recognize pretty much everything that's in there. And in terms of workshop assets, I'm currently sitting at about 1,300. That may seem like a lot, but again, if you're familiar with playthroughs of this game on YouTube, it's really not that much. I've tried to keep it as low as I can. It's kind of a low budget playthrough. And I do expect that number to fluctuate some throughout the series. There's some things that I haven't downloaded yet that I'll need later, and there's some things I have now that I won't need later. So for that reason, I don't have a workshop collection for the assets yet. And most of what I'm using now are low and mid-rise houses and shops that we need to fit the regional style that I'm going for. Okay, so about my video schedule, I'll try to make YouTube videos somewhat regularly, but no guarantees on that. I will, however, be streaming at least weekly, probably on Thursday evenings, and my streams are very low-key, so tune in if that's more your style. And of course, I'll be doing a lot of the grunt work off camera, things like boring road placement and intersection management, that sort of thing. And I'll try to keep a consistent structure in my YouTube videos. So first thing we'll do is a recap of what happened in the last video and in streams that happened between this current video and the last video. And then I'll do maybe 1 or 2 larger projects, probably some time-lapse stuff thrown in there. And yeah, that'll pretty much be it for the YouTube videos. So now that introduction is out of the way, let's actually get into the game and I'll show you around the starter town that I've built. Wait a minute, where's the city? Okay, I may have lied to you. We're in the map editor right now because I do want to talk briefly about the map that I'm using. Now, originally this was a workshop map. I mean, it still is a workshop map. The name of it is Oak Point by Lelanthris. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'll have a link to that in the description or somewhere in this video. But I did edit this map quite a bit from how it was on the workshop. The author said that it was originally intended to be like a Midwestern type of city. You know, this was like a lake shore sort of thing going on. And so I changed it up a little bit to make it fit better with the Mid-Atlantic sort of theme. I've sort of tried to create a little bit of like a Chesapeake Bay type topography here. And the other main thing that I did was remove most of the highways, or edit most of the highways. You can kind of see the remains of where they used to be. Here, I didn't bother messing with the trees because, as you'll see in game, I just kind of delete them as I go. I also decreased the size of these from 3 lanes down to 2. And I edited all the railroads as well to get rid of catenary poles. If you're familiar with the United States, you'll know that pretty much no railways in the US are electrified, at least anymore. Actually, a lot of them used to be. So I did that for realism. I also single-tracked a couple of these railroad lines for realism as well. And added some national roads going through here to represent kind of the rural county roads, same as over here. I didn't really mess with the water too much, aside from adding the massive landmass here and modifying the coastline a little bit. We've still got a lake up here and this small river, which then feeds into the larger river, which will sort of bisect our city, as we'll see. And there's sort of like this old industrial area here, waterfront type of area. And yeah, that's about it for the map. It's pretty standard. It's relatively flat. I will also add, you know, there are some hills over here and also up this way where these wind turbines are. These are kind of a problem for us starting out in the 1920s when wind turbines did not exist. But I don't have that tile yet, so I should have deleted them in the map editor, but at this point I didn't know what I was going to do in terms of starting off the theming at, you know, in the early 20th century. So that is why those are there. Yeah, in terms of the elevation change, it's going to play some role in how we shape our city, but I don't think it's going to play a huge role. Most of this is really stuff that you could kind of just build roads on anyway and not worry about too much. So that's a little bit of a deviation from our inspiration source city of Washington, D.C., which in reality does quite have some areas that are quite hilly, and its topography is rather varied. But yeah, that's about it for the map editor. Now we'll actually hop over and take a look at the starter city and get started on a couple of things to do in this first episode. So here we are in the city. I'll just unpause there so things start moving. This is our starter town. As you can see, we're at about 40 to 4,300 people. And if you've only played Vanilla City Skylines, that may seem a little low to you. We're using a mod here called Realistic Population, which enforces that most of these buildings have 1 or 2 households. 2 if they're a duplex. As you see, a lot of these are duplexes. But generally speaking, with these low density zones, you have relatively few households. And that contributes to the sprawl that we see here. It actually makes it quite challenging in the early game to reach the milestones that you need to get to unlock things, because you start running out of space. As you can see here, we started with the first tile to the south here. And the first main street that I created here is this 4-lane arterial. Old Main Street is what I've named it right now. And it runs vaguely north-south. As you can see, our grid is a little bit offset from north-south here, just to stick with this road. And that was already, you know, pushing towards the edge of that tile. So then from there, we've just expanded westward. I'm calling the direction that we're facing now as north, just so that we're aligned as if we were on the Atlantic coast of the United States. But anyway, this is our first main street here. You can see the commercial shops lining this are mostly low-rise, wall-to-wall commercial. That's kind of the theme that we're going for. Now, from the cinematic camera, you may have noticed that all the vehicles that I've got here are these lovely vintage car assets. These are supposed to be, you know, vaguely from that 1920s to 1930s time period. Some are a little later just due to a lack of assets on the workshop. But I'm pretty happy with these, and they add a lot of atmosphere to the town. But of course, there are some issues that we need to resolve here, namely these illuminated billboards and such are taking away a little bit from the immersion. And I'm not sure if you guys caught it in the cinematic camera, but I certainly did. We have some fire trucks somewhere that are not obeying the vehicle rules. So I'm going to quickly see what I can do about that. I've pulled up here the option panel from Advanced Vehicle Options. This is a mod that allows you to control which versions of or which vehicles are allowed to spawn in your world, and this lets you control service vehicles as well. So we can see here that the default fire truck is not allowed to spawn, so I'm not entirely sure why I saw one earlier. Just keep an eye out, and if we see any similar instances, try to look for those and prevent that from happening. I also have noticed it happen with garbage trucks. Let's see, right now we've only got 2 of 15 in use. Aha! Okay, so I've actually been doing that wrong, and that is why we see the incorrect garbage truck model here. So let me just find my fire stations quickly. I'm going to pull up the fire panel here. Okay, I'm using some custom fire stations obviously, and they're a little bit harder to spot. So there we can see that guy was spawning the incorrect fire truck. I believe the other fire station is... okay, that's random. We'll go ahead and set that to be the old style fire truck as well. Same for this guy. And I'll go through and do this for my service buildings very quickly. I'll skip through that on the recording. Okay, I think that's mostly everything. I've got my police station taken care of, my ambulances, my garbage trucks, my hearses. So here we go. This is something I thought I might take care of in this episode. Right now we need this wind turbine because we're consuming about 48 megawatts of electricity. The default coal power plant only produces 40. Right now that is kicked up to 48 solely by virtue of me increasing the electricity production budget. So what I'm actually going to do is place down this coal power plant, which is an asset that recreates a design from SimCity 3000. It's still a coal power plant. You know, generally when I play this game, I would not use coal power plants, but it does fit with the time period that we're going for in this stage of the game. I'm going to go ahead and place this down. So it's producing the same as this one, which is not what I thought it was supposed to do. In the workshop it said 56 megawatts, so I was like, okay, that'll be perfect. But actually it's not. It will allow us to demolish that. And in fact, we will just go ahead and turn this one off. I could just destroy it actually. It doesn't really fit the correct aesthetic anyway. And what we'll do is just crank this all the way up. That'll give us a bit of headroom until I can figure out what I want to do in terms of power. So our consumption is 49 megawatts and our production is 50. So we're already right on the edge, which is why I was using that wind turbine. And unfortunately it seems like we might have to use one again. I've actually accidentally disconnected our outflow pump here, our sewage outflow pump. That's not good. We'll reconnect that. Okay, well that should solve things hopefully for the time being. I wish this would have maybe a little bit more impact on the power produced. That's probably also due to the realistic population mod messing with things. And as you see now, dusk is falling over Douglas. Once it gets into nighttime, I probably will skip that for you guys. It's rather hard to see anything at nighttime with the map theme and the color correction that I'm using at the moment. I might see what I can do about that in the future. There is one other thing I wanted to check quickly. Take a look at our streetcar line. I'll talk about this. Here's where our tram depot is. Right now we're using only 3 of them. I think we might need to up that to 4. I wanted to try to in some sense get a realistic headway on this streetcar line. You know, the city is not really big enough to warrant a streetcar line, but with the goal that we're going for of reducing car usage and trying to keep a realistic number of vehicles on the road, you know, a lot of people are walking, but we've sort of already gotten to the point where the distances are really too far to walk. And so I wanted to go ahead and create our first streetcar line, which you can see running along Pennsylvania Avenue here. Currently it terminates at this nice little area here. You can see one of our streetcars right here is this nice historically accurate streetcar. I believe this is a model that was in Kansas City. That's what we're using right now. Of course, those will get modernized eventually, but they're serving us well for the moment. So this streetcar line continues down this way, goes through another roundabout here where there's another station, and then it curves off to go down both sides of this block one way. It has stops here by the main street and then continues through our very small industrial area where a good number of the jobs of this town are currently located. And you may notice that there's really not much in the way of industry here right now. Again, that's a consequence of the realistic population mod. As you can see, these buildings have quite a large number of worker slots, and most of them at the moment are nowhere near full, which is why in this episode and very likely in the next several episodes, maybe even the whole series, our demand indicator down here is pretty much only going to show demand on the residential bar, because these workplaces are realistically not ever going to fully fill up, especially once we start building office areas and larger commercial districts. It's going to be difficult to meet that residential demand, especially before we unlock high density residential areas, which I believe does not happen until we reach, is it not even 9,000? No, I believe it's 9,000. Okay, no, it's 6,500. I was mistaken there. So at a population of 6,500, we'll be able to start placing high-density residential zones, and that'll really be where this series takes off, and where phase 1 of our theming takes off. Because what we'll be able to do is start replacing all of these single-family detached homes and many of these duplex units, which are spawning at a much higher frequency than I'd really like them to. I'll have to adjust that in the building themes mod at some point, probably on stream. We'll be able to replace them with townhomes, row houses, and brownstones, and those will make up the bulk of our housing stock in this city. And that's regionally accurate, of course, with DC and surrounding cities, you know, Philadelphia, New York City. That's sort of the housing that will be used for the majority of certainly this part of the city, which is our city center really at this point. I'll get into our future plans probably in a later episode. And as you can see, night is starting to fall. So I'm going to skip through this, speed through things, fix our power problems. Wow. So things escalated much more quickly than I was anticipating in terms of our power issues, and it seems to be that our power plant has run out of fuel. So I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure why this is happening or how this is happening. It may be that I have inadvertently disabled all of the vehicles that would regularly bring fuel to our coal power plant. So let me see if I can quickly remedy that. Okay, no, we still should be able to receive oil. And or, I'm not entirely sure which one delivers goods to the coal power plant. But for the moment, we're going to have to take drastic action here and place down some wind turbines. I am rather limited in terms of where I can place these. For now, I will place them out of the way in this region, so they're not really, hopefully not super visible in most of our aerial footage here. Okay, now yeah, so you'll see here it thinks that our production is 183 megawatts. That's because it's counting all of those wind turbines that I can't actually see here. Let's go into free camera. All of those wind turbines up on that hill, which were here from the map editor. Each one of those is, of course, also, I don't think I have to pay for those because they're outside of the area, but for some reason they're still counted. They're still counted here in the electricity production chart, and obviously they are not connected via power lines, so we are dealing with some problems in that respect. Okay, so these turbines are coming online now, producing 10 megawatts apiece, and fortunately that has resolved our power woes for the moment. It's also significantly cut into our surplus here. But that is something I will deal with in the future. I will keep an eye on this coal power plant to see if it is able to get any fuel. Not entirely sure what the issue is. It may just be that okay, here we go. Here's the truck. Let's follow it. Make sure it gets there. It may have just been lost, or it just took it a while to get there. So there we go. Our power output has been restored. I'm actually going to go ahead and reduce this since we just placed down those wind turbines, and I'm not going to rip them up right now. We'll just leave them in there, pretending they don't exist. But we need them for their power at the moment. Okay. Our consumption is still 51 megawatts. Here we're making 40, and here we're making, I believe, 24 total. So we're definitely covered for the moment on power. As we watch the sun rise over Douglas, it is a hazy morning, but here we are. Not much happened over the night. I realized we're maybe a little bit closer to financial break-even than I had realized, but overall things are progressing nicely. Our next task, probably for the next episode, is going to be to expand this residential area westward to get our population up to that next milestone and unlock high density housing. And like I said, that'll really be where things take off for this series. We'll be able to build out phase 1, so to speak, and get this town to look a little more dense, look a little more European in some ways, a little more northeastern in a lot of ways. But that'll be where we go from here. So with that, I thank you all for watching. I hope you'll tune in for streams, which, like I said, will happen on Thursday nights usually. Like everything that is subject to potentially change and not be super regular, but that's just the way things go around here. And the next episode of this on YouTube will hopefully come sooner rather than later. But yeah, that about does it for this episode, this inaugural episode of my latest City Skylines playthrough. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.